Hi, Facebook. I'm just going to give it a minute to see who's on with me. It looks like my connection isn't very good. So hopefully you guys can see and hear me tonight. So I'm going to be talking about my personal testimony with my son. I'm going to start off back in the very beginning. So about 11 years ago was when my son was born. I was a very happy, expectant mom, first-time mom. I had a lot of thoughts on how my child would be when he was born. And, I found out very quickly that my dream for him wasn't going to work out quite the way I anticipated. I'm seeing that the connection's pretty weak. Let me know who's on. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll try to answer if I can tonight, if they're not too difficult to answer. I see Perry, you're on. I see Nicole on. I'll start by saying that I am not a doctor. I'm not a specialist in the field of kids with special needs. I'm just a parent, like the rest of you, who's been living this reality for the last 11 years. I want to start off talking about the very beginning of our journey when I had my son. I know there's a lot of people out there who were very much like me. Maybe you noticed some things right away about your child that didn't seem quite right, but you weren't sure what was going on. In my family, there were no learning disabilities. My mom didn't have any issues with her kids. My sisters didn't have any problems with their children. So when my son was born, I expected, this perfect child, and, he was going to be super smart. Maybe he would be the next, next doctor, next scientist, next, something big. Parents always have big expectations for their kids. And right away, I want to say right away after he was born, in the hospital, I ended up in a C-section. Wasn't my plan by any means. I guess I want to start off by saying that our words are very important. I always had a fear of delivery. Never had a fear about being pregnant. I was anticipating a good pregnancy. I had a great pregnancy. Never really had any problems, but I was not looking forward to the birthing process. Actually, I was pretty scared. When it came down to it, I could have stayed pregnant for my entire life. I would have had no problems with it. I wasn't anxious to have him at all when it came down to, the 9-month mark. When the day came, I was due December 1st. I didn't end up having my son until December 17th. He just wasn't ready to come. And I ended up being induced. Didn't really know what to expect. I expected, everything to be, quite natural, but it didn't work out that way for me. After about 15 hours of labor, I ended up in a C-section. After the C-section, I was put to sleep. So I'm not sure, if any of you out there had been put to sleep with a C-section before. But you wake up from surgery, and you don't realize that your child has been born. Um, I thought I was still pregnant. They handed me this child. I was very looped up on medication. And I remember looking at him and saying, "Are you sure he's mine?" I swore I was still pregnant. I, felt my stomach and realized, it's not there anymore. So I had a really tough time from the very beginning. I had absolutely no connection with my child. My husband got the immediate, parent connection with him, but I did not. It took me almost a year to connect with my child emotionally. Um, I spent 3 days at the hospital. In the 3 days I was there, I only breastfed my son once. I had no idea what they were feeding him. I was in so much pain, I really did not care if he was with me or not. I know that sounds bad, but it was a mental and emotional state I was in at the time. I went through postpartum depression severely. For the next few months, I did not even want to pick him up hardly at all. My husband did a lot of taking care of our son in the very beginning. Um, when we got home, I noticed he was having a very hard time, and he wasn't breastfeeding. I ended up taking him to a person who helps with breastfeeding, and we tried everything, and he just wasn't picking it up. So, we tried bottle feeding him, and, we did the formulas and all that. He was allergic to all the formulas. So I ended up bottle feeding him breast milk for about 2 years. When, the time came when you're supposed to be able to feed your child rice cereal and, all these little starter foods, my son was not able to handle them. He ended up gagging and choking on everything that I tried to give him that had any form of texture to it. That was one of the things that we noticed at that stage. Early on, even before that, I noticed some subtle issues. As he was growing, the 2 week mark, the 3 week mark, when they start to kind of tip their head, look at you, they start to smile. A month down the road after they're born, my son would turn his head completely to the side. He'd look at you out of the corner of his eye. At first, I thought it was cute, and then I realized this doesn't seem normal to me. I started questioning, why is he doing this? And I noticed he would do other things, like when I would lay him on his back, he would kick his feet up in the air, up like an inch off the ground repeatedly, kicking both of his legs. He would do that for an hour at a time. Then he would hold his legs isometrically off the ground for a minute, for a few minutes, and then he would kick again, and he would do this for hours. And I thought, wow, I could make a video of this. I mean, this would be the greatest abdominal workout for somebody, but I just knew it wasn't normal. I started questioning, asking my sister if she had this problem with her child, and no, it seemed to not be anything anybody had experienced before. So I didn't think, a whole lot of it. It was always in the back of my mind. Something didn't seem right. As the milestone markers show up, and your child is supposed to be, at 6 months doing this and at 9 months doing this, I was noticing that Zachariah met very few of those mile markers. He sat up a little later than normal. He stood up and started walking at pretty much the normal rate. But as he went from laying on his back to sitting up, I noticed that the repetitive behaviors were still there. They were just different. So instead of kicking his feet nonstop, he would sit, I would put him in like a bouncy seat, and he would bounce nonstop. He didn't want you to pick him up. He just wanted to be left alone, bouncing in his chair. And he would bounce for an hour or two at a time. He would bounce himself to sleep. I'd have to pick him up and put him in his crib. And this was a day-to-day occurrence. It was very seldom that he wanted you to hold him. You know, I would pick him up, I'd try to hold him, we'd try to play. I'd put him on his stomach, put him on his back. He wanted that bouncy seat, we'd put him in the bouncy seat. And it was just this repetitive motion. I started to put two and two together and realized he just went from kicking his feet nonstop to bouncing nonstop. At about 15 months, I decided something was really wrong. He wasn't eating any foods. He was still on breast milk. I breastfed him until he was over 2 years old. But at 15 months, I noticed it wasn't just repetitive motions. When I tried to teach him a skill, so I tried to teach him how to roll a ball when he was young. It took over 6 months for me to show him how to push a ball. Now, if I handed him a toy car and I wanted him to push the car, like rolling the ball, it took him another 6 months to figure out how to push that car. It seemed like the same motion for me, but for him it was not the same. So every new skill took another 6 months. I tried to teach him, okay, so I'm teaching him a push forward car. Now I'm going to do a pullback car. That took even longer because now I've added a new skill and he just wasn't getting it. So at that point, I had caught the attention of my sister, who said there's something seriously wrong because he's really not doing what he should be doing. But I had no idea where to go for help. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, I had my parents, I had my husband's parents, I had my husband who was convinced there was nothing wrong with him at all. And he's fine, he's going to grow out of it, it's no big deal. He just, you know, he's having problems. You know, he's a little behind, that's fine. So I was kind of on my own to figure out what to do and where to go. Thank God there was a lady in New York City who happened to be a customer of my sister's for her business, and I was in sales in her business and I was selling. And I happened to be talking to her on the phone, and she heard my son in the background. And he would scream a lot. And it was just his way of communicating. He never babbled. He never tried to talk. He never tried to mimic you talking. He never tried at all. All he did was scream or nothing. He was either the quietest kid on the planet or he was screaming his head off. So this day he was screaming, and she asked me if I had a bird, and I said, no, it was my son. I'm sorry, you know, for the noise in the background. And she asked me if he had any problems, and I said, well, I'm noticing some things, but I don't know where to go for help. And she had directed me to the county health department. So I had gone to our doctor with Zachariah when he was little, and the doctor did not notice anything wrong, so he didn't direct me anywhere. And I called. So if you're in Tompkins County or Cortland County and you have a child that you think may have developmental delays, they're not meeting their mile markers, you can call Francisca Racker Center to get an evaluation done for your child. I happened to be in Cayuga County. I had called the Racker Center, and they could not help me because they don't have one in Cayuga County. So I ended up calling the health department the county health department, and they got me in touch with early intervention. Early intervention showed up at my house to do Zachariah's evaluation. I had no idea what they were going to do when they got there, but it was the most sterile test I think I've ever experienced with my child. I sat back and watched them open a book and do a series of things with him. They would point to pictures. They would want him to try to respond in different ways. They would roll a ball to him to see what he'd do. They did many, many things with him, but it was very sterile, I think is the best word that I can use. They closed the book after about an hour and told me, your child, even though he's 15 months old, is showing the skills of a 6-month-old. Everything inside me stopped. I went through a lot of emotions. I've been working with him. In my mind, I kept saying, I've been working with my son. I've been trying to teach him. I've taken months and months to show him how to do one skill. And it was very time consuming, very frustrating. And this test basically showed me that I hadn't taught my son anything. I went through a lot of feelings of being a failure as a mother. And my son was still young. He wasn't even 2 yet, and I've already failed. That was how I felt. If you can relate, please let me know. Because these are feelings that I experienced when he was very young. And I was just going through this, just learning about it. We hadn't even gotten to therapy yet. They just basically come out and tell me, your kid doesn't know anything. So they were getting me connected with somebody who could help my son in therapy. And he ended up with a speech therapist, a occupational therapist right away. They were very good. They got a couple people there to help him. And I couldn't imagine what they were going to do with him because he was so young. And I was having such a hard time, teaching him anything. But they were very good. They come in and they would explain things to me of what they were going to do and why they were doing what they were doing. I found out early on that he was having a lot of sensory integration issues. In the beginning, I had no idea what sensory integration dysfunction meant, but I was told he had that. If you are experiencing with your child that they can walk on their bare feet across all kinds of sharp wooden and hard toys without feeling any pain, not registering any feeling, they might have sensory integration problems. That was one of the signs that I saw right away. Another sign was he would not register any pain at all. He hit his head. He, broke it open. He was bleeding profusely. He had a huge gash on his head. Didn't even know he hit himself. So there were a lot of signs that he actually had no feeling when it came to, in his arms and his legs, everywhere. I mean, he just had no feeling. And so we started there. I don't want to give you a whole lot of information tonight. I just kind of want to start you off with, what kind of signs can you look for with your child. If you have a very young child, make sure you watch the markers, the growth markers, and see if your child's meeting those growth markers. If they're not able to sit, at the right time frame within a month or so, and they're not walking, and they're not crawling, and they're not, able to pick up a skill in a decent amount of time, that's a good indication that there's something else going on. I want to bring my husband in on our next live talk. I want him to kind of show his perspective. You know, in the beginning, I had talked about how our words are very powerful. And one of the things that I said in the very beginning, before I even had a child, before I was even pregnant, was I am terrified of the birthing process. I'm terrified. I am afraid that, it's not going to go well. I'm afraid I'm going to have problems. And that's exactly what happened. Your fears can become reality. Your words can produce reality. So, be careful about what you say and what you speak. Um, I just want to, give that as a word of warning. My husband's going to come on next week and tell you what he had to say because he said some things too in the very beginning, and I believe that we are living a product of his words as well. So I'm sure you'll find that very interesting. But if you are not sure where to go for help, your doctor, is not helping you, um, you feel like you're all alone in this, process trying to figure out how to get your child help. Um, no matter where you are in the country, you should be able to call your county health department and get the information for early intervention. Early intervention covers from birth to 3 years old, I believe, and then it jumps in New York State. It jumps to the school system starting at 3 years old. If you can get your child help, the earlier you can get them help, the better. Um, it's really important when you're noticing a problem that you get them help as early as you can. It'll prevent a lot of things from getting worse later on. But I want to carry on from this, once he started getting therapy, um, and tell you kind of some of the things that we've experienced, and some of them good, some of them not so good. Um, and, I just want people to know that they're not alone going through this process, and it is a process. It changes daily. He still has problems. He's 11 years old. He still has issues. And, although things have gotten better, some things have not. Um, so I will be back on again, hopefully this time, same time next Friday. I'm going to try to do this once a week. For this series, I'm looking at it probably taking about 4 weeks to conclude. So, thank you guys for stopping in. And if you know anybody who has any children, or you yourself has a child that has learning disabilities, I'm going to be walking through what we've experienced with him in school system. What I've done, I homeschooled him for a while, so we'll be talking about that too. Disciplines, we'll be getting into disciplines, what works, what doesn't work, and why they work and why they don't work. So just stop back in. I'll be posting again next Friday to let you know I'll be back on. But thank you guys for stopping in, and hopefully something I said helped you. Have a good night.